May is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month, and this is the last episode of our four-part series dedicated to this very important topic. Today, I'm excited to be joined by two of my friends who have created an amazing business that supports lots of new moms. Holly and Ellen also live here in Charlottesville, and they are both moms themselves. Their maternal coaching business is called Mother Tree Wellness, and if you don't already know them, I can't wait for you to get to know them. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Hey, ladies. Thanks so much for joining me today. I am incredibly grateful that you have taken the time to chat with my audience about this incredibly important topic. Holly, you and I met through our husbands years ago, and we get to celebrate our anniversary regularly. And I've gotten to know Ellen through you, and you both have helped so many moms in my community. And in fact, in the last week's episode, Caroline shared a bit with everyone here about how Holly supported her through her postpartum journey. So people have already heard a little bit about you. So thanks again for joining me. And before we dive in, can you please take a second to tell everyone about yourselves in case they don't already know who you are?
All right. Thank you so much for having us today, Allison. We are so thrilled to be here and so excited to get to be on your podcast. We have loved tuning into your episodes. So we're super excited to be here. My name is Ellen Jones. Along with Holly, I am one of the co-founders of Mother Tree Wellness. We are a maternal wellness coaching practice. We're based here in Charlottesville, Virginia, but thankfully, because our work is virtual, we're able to work with moms everywhere. So a little about me. I have a background in mental health counseling, as you'll hear that Holly does too, and two children, a 7-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter. We have two very large dogs and a wonderful husband, and we just run our circus together. So that is a little about me.
Awesome. So I'm Holly Kennedy. And as Ellen mentioned, I also have a background in mental health counseling. And I don't think a day has gone by since we started Mother Tree Wellness that I don't reflect upon how incredibly grateful I am for the opportunity to just connect with amazing women all over the place. And I also have two children, two boys. They are 7 and 9. And so we have a very active household.
And you two met during your own postpartum journeys. Is that correct?
Yes, we did through a series of very fortunate events. We got to cross paths many, many times between, let's see, 9-ish years ago until we finally founded Mother Tree Wellness together 2 years ago.
Awesome. And I know you both had your own struggles with postpartum depression and anxiety. And would you be open to sharing a little bit about your own personal journeys?
Oh, absolutely. We would love it. Thank you for asking. The thing that is so important when it comes to talking about any postpartum challenges is that so many of us are feeling like we are the only ones. So we're hesitant to be the first one to open the door and really talk about it. And we find every single day in our work with Mother Tree Wellness that as soon as one person is willing to kind of come forward and just lay it out all on the table, everyone else goes, whew, this is a safe place to do that. And everyone else feels comfortable to do the same. So we are always happy to be the first people to open that door. So as far as my own postpartum journey goes, before having children, we as moms to be get so many messages coming at us from everywhere. And it's a whole spectrum. It's everything from, oh, you better, say goodbye to sleep. You're never going to sleep again, to, oh, you're about to have the happiest days of your life. And so because of all these messages coming in, it's really hard to know exactly what to expect. And as I mentioned earlier, I have a background in mental health counseling, but even with that, even with my professional training, when I became a mom, nothing was as I expected it was going to be. It was all the things at once. It was joyful. It was messy. It was so difficult. It was so exhausting. It was so life giving. It was all the things at once. Uh, I developed postpartum anxiety pretty early on in my daughter's life, which I think we're going to keep talking more about as we go through today. What I didn't realize at the time is that I actually had a lot of risk factors for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, or PMADs for short. Some of those being that I was a type A perfectionist. And I had no idea at the time that when you're a perfectionist and you love a plan and you love knowing what's coming, and then you enter motherhood and suddenly this newborn baby has taken the wheel, it's incredibly disorienting. And I didn't have any skills to know how to navigate a situation in which all of my autonomy and my ability to feel competent was basically taken away from me at the time. So, on top of that, we had some feeding troubles, which is also sort of an area that can make someone more likely to develop some postpartum challenges. And we weren't getting any sleep. So, all of this combined led to a postpartum anxiety experience for me that I didn't recognize in myself until basically I was on the other side of it and I was able to look back and sort of see what I had experienced. So, that's a little bit about mine. That's a very long story, as short as I could possibly make it. What about you, Holly? Let's hear about yours.
Yes to all of that. I think I was so caught off guard because I thought I knew what to expect, and then nothing felt like I had envisioned. And then I just started thinking, well, maybe there's something wrong with me then. Everyone else can do this. Okay, maybe it's just me. It's something that I am failing at. And then that just led down the rabbit hole. And I think for me, one of the biggest challenges was I wasn't talking to anyone about it with my first child. I was just looking around thinking everyone else has it together. And I wish I could have figured out a way earlier on to kind of wave a flag and say, wait a second, I don't know if I'm supposed to feel this way, but this feels terrible. This feels so rotten. I think, I can talk about it later, but just finding my own path, I think part of it was just being able to kind of acknowledge, hey, I don't feel like myself. I don't know if I'm supposed to feel this way. I don't know what to feel, but whatever this is, I don't like it. It just felt really messy to me. And so I think the other thing is it's so disorienting. And I think when we haven't experienced something before, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what to ask. We don't know who to ask. It's just kind of disorienting is the word that really comes up for me when I think about my postpartum journey. Because it's also like, oh my gosh, I have this baby. It's amazing. I'm so happy. And I'm crying and I'm anxious and I'm all these other things. And I mean, things were oozing out of me literally and physically and mentally and emotionally that I just couldn't contain or figure out.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I have a follow up question for both of you and listening to your introduction. So, Ellen, you mentioned that you didn't know at the time you had some, I don't know if you use the word risk factors or some things that made you more susceptible to this. And it's interesting you bring that up. So, that specific item you mentioned of being kind of type A overachiever has come up in every conversation I've had so far, I believe. And so I'm curious, are there other key characteristics that women might have that would make them more susceptible? I know it can affect anyone, but make them more likely to experience PMADs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a great and long list of risk factors. But some of the characteristics that can make someone more susceptible include having a history of depression or anxiety previously, having experienced those things previously, and also having a birth or early motherhood experience that doesn't align with what your expectations were. So that can include experiencing any kind of birth trauma. If your birth experience was really scary in any way, again, that's just defined by you. If it felt really scary to you, then it was scary. Those are some of the first ones that come to mind for me.
Okay, cool. And Holly, you mentioned that it looked like everyone had it all together. And I remember totally feeling that way the few times I ventured out when I was struggling with my own postpartum anxiety. But do you think that's how most of us view other new moms? Like, do you think people were looking at you and thinking, yeah, Holly's got it all together. She's fine?
That is a really good question. And probably because I think whenever I saw people, I worked so hard to make it seem like I had it all together. And then I remember I would come home and I would completely crash. Like the first time I took my first son to Target, I was like, this is it. I'm getting out. I'm getting my life back. I can do this. He screamed the entire way through Target. It was absolutely terrible. But the whole time I'm like laughing. I'm like, people are looking at me and I'm like, okay, I got this. I got into the car and I sobbed for probably a solid hour. And my thought was, great, my life is over. I'm never going anywhere ever again. I can't figure it out. I'm a failure. But at that time in Target, I kept it all together. And I think that's the other thing is you work so hard keeping it all together. And then, you have those moments by yourself or in the bathroom crying or in the closet crying, or I cried everywhere. I mean,
And I know Ellen said she didn't really identify her struggles until she was on the other side. And that's exactly how I was as well. But Holly, you did eventually get help. Is that correct?
absolutely. Yes.
I would love to hear what was most helpful to you in your recovery. What was the trigger to, what was a breaking point where you finally thought, okay, I need help one way or the other? Can you tell us a little bit about that part of the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. There are two very distinct moments that come to mind with that question. And the one was, I want to say my son was like maybe 2 months old. I don't, who knows? It's a time warp. He was some weeks, some days old. And I got up in the morning and I took a shower, which was a rare thing. And I thought to myself, today's the day. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to throw a fit. Like today is the day I can do this. And within 20 minutes, I still remember this so vividly. I'm at the kitchen counter sobbing, just sobbing, 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 because I couldn't do it. And I had all the intentions in the world of this is what I'm going to do. And it was that moment where I was like, maybe something else is going on. Then the other moment was, fortunately, I had had a therapist that I connected with before my children were born. So I reconnected with her and we were sitting in her office and she said, so I think you're experiencing postpartum anxiety and depression. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And she was like, well, we're both therapists. If you'd like, let's get out the diagnostic manual and let's take a look at what this might look like for somebody. So we took a look at it and I was like, oh, wow, look at that.
Which I think is so telling and interesting when you think about, common theme is our brains can lie to us during this period and they're living these lies. And so for me, when I think about the fact that you are a trained therapist and you couldn't see it in yourself, do you have thoughts on that or why you think that is?
I have so many thoughts on that. I've thought about that a lot. What's interesting, I love that you said that our brain doesn't always give us accurate information because that was one of the things that my therapist said to me. And that was a turning point for me was this isn't who you are. This isn't defining you. This is happening to you. Your brain, your body, all the chemicals, all the hormones, they're just not being nice to you. They are not playing nicely right now. And it allowed me to shift my thinking from there's something wrong with me. I'm a failure. If I just try hard enough, I can figure this out, to feeling cared for and nurtured. Like, gosh, your brain is being really unkind to you. That's terrible that it's giving you all of these messages. And there was something in that that really shifted for me. Because, sometimes people can tell you things, but it's either the timing or how it's phrased. And my guess is that people were giving me this message for a while. I'm pretty sure my husband, who was super supportive, tried many ways to tell me, hey, perhaps we might want to think about this a little bit more. But there was something about that moment that I was able to hear it and think about it differently.
I think that's a really telling comment. And I would love to hear from both of you because a common theme we've had, and I say it to women all the time, like check in on your friends. When you have a friend who's a new mom, check in on her. And in my previous conversation, if people listened with Britt had checked in with her friend Allison. And I think that you are left thinking, did I not say the right thing? And maybe that's what it was. She just didn't hear that people were checking in on her. What are your thoughts when you're trying to check in on a friend and something in your gut tells you that they are struggling, but maybe they aren't quite ready to receive that message? Do you guys have advice on that?
Yes, that is such a great question. And I'm so glad you asked it because it's so easy when you're in the circle surrounding a new mom. You can want to be helpful and not know exactly how, and you can feel a little bit helpless. And the reality is that it really does come down to the timing and the mom needing to feel ready to take the next step toward engaging whatever resources are going to be helpful to her. But I would say for friends that want that new mom to know that they are there, to just send the texts saying, "Hey, how are you doing? Baby," everybody's going to ask how baby is doing. Uh, New moms can often, we talk about new moms often feeling like candy wrappers. You're anticipating baby coming along and you've got this delicious candy, and then baby comes along, and what happens to the wrapper? It just gets thrown in the garbage. And new moms can feel so invisible. And so just doing whatever you can to make that mom feel seen and heard. uh, Another aspect of this is that new moms don't always know what they need, what kind of help they need. Actually, I would say most of the time as new moms, we don't know what we need. And so, one approach that a friend can take is to say, as opposed to saying, "Hey, let me know if I can do anything to help you," sending a message or calling them and saying, "Hey, I would love to come over and hold baby while you take a shower or a nap, or do your dishes, or fold your laundry, or go on a walk with you. Tell me which one of these things I'm going to come and do." And that way, it really shows that as a friend, you mean it, and it makes it all that much easier for that new mom to accept help. We have so many reasons that, as moms, as women, as humans, it's incredibly difficult to accept help, even when it's offered very freely and openly for us. So, whatever we can do as friends to open that door for the new mom, to make it as easy as possible for her to accept the help, is wonderful. And then from there, to just know that you're doing enough as a friend. You're doing the best you can by making that new mom feel seen, offering ways that you can be a help to her, and knowing that it is a two-way street and the mom does need to feel, some level of readiness to come and accept it.
Totally. And I think in other conversations that I've had, not that everyone has struggled, and people who haven't struggled, that's fantastic. So we're thrilled for you. But if you are someone who had some struggles, I think sometimes opening the door just by sharing a little bit about your story does open that door if they do want to talk about it, or they do want to at least feel like there's a mirror there, someone sees them. I think that can help, but that's not everyone's story that they had struggles. So you don't have to have had struggles to want to help your friend. So I like that advice of just being there with which one of these can I do for you? So I'd love to know, so you guys met early on in motherhood, and when did you put the pieces together that you both had your own struggles and that maybe there would be some magic here? And how did Mother Tree Wellness come about?
I love telling this story. I love telling this story for so many reasons. Part of this story embarrasses Holly, and I love telling that part. We have a sort of an origin story that still blows my mind to this day. So we met when our babies were very little. Unbeknownst to us, both of us were forcing ourselves out of the house each day to try to move through this time period that was so difficult for us. We met at what was then called Baby Boot Camp, which is now One Fit Mother, which is a mom and baby stroller fitness class, not just for little ones in strollers, for kids of all ages in Charlottesville. And we met, I remember it so clearly. I mean, so much of the past 9 years, I mean, don't even get me started on the past 2 years. So much of the past 9 years has been a total blur, but this moment I remember so clearly. We were running laps. Okay, podcast listeners, you cannot see Holly, but she's already rolling her eyes because she knows what's coming. And she was lapping me. I mean, Holly was fast as lightning. And I was always like a middle of the pack gal, back of the pack gal. And so she was lapping me, but there was this brief moment where we were right in line with each other. I remember it so clearly. And we started talking. We realized that we both had the same backgrounds in mental health counseling. Now, we did not mention anything about what our current situations and what we were navigating in that moment, but we just got the conversation started from there. And then I love to say that Holly was the real visionary here. She had this idea in her mind for years. She and I started working together, offering a pro bono group for new moms at a local nonprofit here in Charlottesville. And we just started through that process talking about what we see as the needs for moms, because what we were finding from our own experiences and from the moms that we were working with were these gaps. Talk therapy is amazing, and yet there is a huge spectrum between getting no help at all and getting therapy. Therapy is an amazing option when it is aligned with your path and it feels like the right thing for you. But there were all of these moms to us that seem to be falling into this gap of not knowing what resources are available to them and not having a resource that offered what we saw as the real needs, which were a place for moms to get information about what they can expect, real talk about what can be expected during this time period, frameworks to help make sense of the ups and downs, that information that Holly mentioned earlier about the hormones and the huge hormonal shifts. When we become moms, there's a process called matrescence, which sounds like adolescence for a reason. It's this total transformation that happens when we become moms. And that is on every level, psychological, cognitive, and physical. We experience similar levels of hormonal upheaval when we become moms as we do in adolescence. And so all of this information is so empowering to have, to help us as new moms feel that sense of control, and that sense of understanding of what we're going through so that we know it's not just us and that we're not doing something wrong. So we saw that information piece as being a real area of opportunity, as well as an action focused approach that also included connecting with other moms, because there's so much about new motherhood that's so isolating. And when we're able to connect with other moms to talk about it, that isolation vanishes, and so much of that guilt and that comparison, it's just lifted off our shoulders when we talk with other moms and realize that we're not the only ones. So we started sort of percolating these ideas, and then the strangest part of this whole story is that we started running into each other everywhere. We live on opposite sides of town. There is really no reason that we would be overlapping this much, but it got to the point where we were running into each other so much that we would walk into a place and like scan the room for each other. It was that often. And every time we would say, "Are we ready? Are we ready?" And one day it was at our local smoothie shop. Shout out to the Juice Laundry. We ran into each other and we said, "Are we ready?" And we went, "Oh, yeah, we're ready." And we just jumped into it from there.
That's awesome. And, at this point, I think you're about 2 years in, and you all have worked with a lot of moms, and you've talked about this gap. So there's a lot that I think falls into the gap that you all are filling. But I'm curious, now that you've worked with so many new moms, what do you wish you could tell every mom before they brought their baby home?
I love this question. Part of me wants to tell them nothing. And I know that sounds really counterintuitive. Here's why. Because I think the biggest thing I would want a mom to hear is you do you. Like, the motherhood journey is so unique for every person. And I think, especially, when we talk about type A people, we like to have a plan, we like to know what it looks like. And in most things in life, you're like, if I research enough, if I talk to enough people, if I think enough and overthink some more, I can figure this out. And then motherhood has a way of like blowing that all out of the water. And so I wish that there was a way to tell people, just find what works for you as much as you can. Tune out the external noise and voices. Take the bits and pieces that work for you, leave the rest, and just figure out what works for you in motherhood, because there's just so many different ways to do it and so many resources out there and it's also trial and error, right? Like, even working with my therapist, I was like, cool, I've got a plan. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then as I tried things out, I'm like, nope, that doesn't work for me. Nope, that doesn't work for me either. So it was also kind of trial and error of what's working for me at this moment. Cool, I'm going to go with that. And then in the next moment, all right, maybe I'll try to add this in, or maybe I'll try this again. Like I often joke, I was a playgroup dropout because my therapist kept saying, hey, you got to find your village. And I'm like, that sounds awesome, but that's another thing I'm failing at, because I can't find my village because I wasn't feeling like myself. So I'd go to these play dates. I'd feel terribly awkward. I'd come home. I'd beat myself up about how awkward I am and I can't socialize. And then I'd drop out of a play group again. And what I realized is not only did I need to figure out kind of what resources might be helpful, but also the order of operation. So what I really probably would have been helpful is called someone like you, Allison, to get sleep first. So then if I got the sleep piece, then I could feel like myself, then I could try these play groups, then I could do this and this. So I wish it was this idea of, hey, do you in motherhood and do it in moments. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just kind of take it in moments of what's working in this moment. Cool. What's not working in this moment? All right, let's let that go. Maybe we'll revisit it. Maybe we won't. But I feel like so often we kind of have these broad strokes of, I mean, I even do it today. Like, I had a good day, I had a bad day. Well, that's not actually true. I had different moments in the day, and they don't have to label them as good or bad. I just kind of had these moments. So I wish there was a way to kind of take that pressure off of, just take it as it goes, get to know yourself as a mom. Because it's how I use the word disorienting, it's like an orientation process. You need an orientation time, just like you do when you do anything new. So kind of have, as much as you can, some grace and space for that orientation time. I mean, I'm still orienting. Every time my kids do something else, it's like a whole other reorienting. I'm like, oh, I think I got this. Nope, just kidding. I don't.
Well, it's funny you say that, because that's what my advice to all my overachieving friends is, do all the preparing you want. Like, if they're like me, they're going to want to read the books and they're going to do all the things. And I say, that's all fantastic. I don't try to talk them out of it. But what I do tell them is, just know that becoming a parent is very humbling. And not to freak anyone out, but not only is it humbling in the newborn stages, it continues to humble you at each new phase. It's different. It's not as drastic as becoming a new parent or even welcoming additional children, but it continues to be humbling. And I have had many moms circle back and say, oh, I'm so glad you told me that, because when everything wasn't going as planned, I just thought, okay, well, it's humbling. And I think your advice is good too, of just don't try to take it all in. It reminds me a little bit about why I didn't do a birth plan. And I'm glad I personally didn't have a birth plan, because how my delivery went, which, Ellen, to your point, I would categorize it as traumatic. There's no way I would have written that in my birth plan. So at least in that regard, in that moment, I was like, well, I didn't really have a plan, so we're just going with it. And I think that ended up benefiting me because my birth was crazy with my first. The second one, I kind of did have a birth plan. It did go according to plan, but I think that's great advice. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Ellen?
No, I think Holly nailed it.
Perfect. Perfect. So, one of the things that you all have talked about with the moms in my community that you have generously met with and come to speak to that group is that the sense of losing ourselves when we become mothers. So, we kind of all have our identities, and I actually kind of think as many of us have become mothers at a later age, this piece is feeling more drastic. Maybe I'm making that up and you guys would disagree, but a lot of women are waiting. I just talked to a 43-year-old today who had a baby. And so I think there is this great sense of suddenly losing ourselves when we become a mother. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this because one of the things that we can't unsee once we start to see it in motherhood is ambivalence, which is this idea that we can hold conflicting thoughts and feelings at the same time, and they're both true. So it's not, I love being a mom or I miss my previous self. It's not either or, it's both and. I love being a mom and I miss my previous self. And once we can begin to recognize that ambivalence and know that it's okay to hold both of those, we can alleviate so much of the guilt that we can feel if we feel like we do miss our our previous self, our self before having children, because it is totally expected and okay to grieve that former self, to miss all of that autonomy you used to have. And, we've heard it often described as, I used to be fun. And now I'm a mom. And it's okay to look back on that and to miss those times. And I just want to make sure to name that there is this guilt that can come along with that, especially if we really wanted to be moms, especially, if you had any sort of a fertility journey, for example, and you worked really hard to get to motherhood. If you get to motherhood and you feel like you're missing your old self, that guilt can be especially strong. And so it's so great to be able to recognize that ambivalence and know that both can be true, because when we become moms, everything in our lives shift. Our priorities shift, our boundaries shift, the way that we look at relationships shift. If we're working, the way that we look at our work shifts. And we might feel like we walked into motherhood as a totally different person than the person we were before having a little one. And as Holly said, it's this orientation process of getting to know this current version of you, knowing that moment by moment, this current version of you is going to fluctuate and shift, just like we always have in our lives. It's just that the motherhood transition in some ways feels so immediate. You walk into your hospital or your birthing center or your bathroom or whatever your birth plan had, if you were able to follow through on that, as one person, and you feel like you walk out a totally different person just like that with the snap of your fingers. So that can sort of create this feeling of whiplash and this feeling of, wow, what just happened to me? Who am I right now? It can also be especially stark for us if we have partners and we feel like maybe they didn't make that same huge transformation that we did. That can really highlight it, make it feel even more real for ourselves. So that fact that everything shifts and that it's okay to grieve that former self and be happy about who you are right now, and probably 100 other thoughts and feelings in between, that we can hold them all at once. It's uncomfortable to do that, especially at first, but once we begin to recognize that ambivalence and see it everywhere, it can help us to sort of see it's not just us. And once again, we have a theme here of it's not just us and we're not doing anything wrong.
Oh my gosh, it's funny you mentioned that because when you said about your partner maybe not going through the same shift, I have this very distinct memory. It was either 2 or 3 weeks after Addison was born that Mike went skiing for a day. And I just remember in hindsight, he shouldn't have done that. I mean, I will tell him 10 times over. But I remember sitting there and thinking, wow, will I ever be able to do that? And I mean, yes, I went on to do lots of things on my own, and I am all about girls' trips. But that was that day still, 9 years later. I can remember exactly where I was standing, where he said, I'm going to go skiing for the day, and thinking, I don't have that luxury. I can't, that's no longer an option. We used to both be independent operators, and now I'm stuck here. I'm stuck here with this baby. And there's like a complete moment of panic. So that's interesting that you bring that up, and it's like triggering to me. So when you have a mom who is nodding along as you were talking and thinking, yes, I am both of these things, and I do feel like I have a loss of self. I'm curious if you have kind of one piece of advice on where they could start to find this new sense of self or their new self. Like, what's a good starting point?
Yes. Yeah. So I think the first part is a little bit about what I talked about before, is this idea of there's sometimes we might have all the pieces, but it's how do we put the pieces in and which goes first at that given moment? Like, what's the right fit at the given moment? Because I think sometimes what can happen is it feels like putting a square peg into a round hole, where you're like, okay, I used to really enjoy like being creative. I'll just start to kind of pursue some creative endeavor, which sounds simple enough. But as we know with a baby, nothing is that simple. And we love this saying by Postpartum Support Virginia about this idea of you have to put out the fire before you can rewire the house. And the idea being is sometimes we really need to focus on kind of those base foundational points that we need in our everyday life before we can move up. Like, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, it's sleep, it's eating, it's water, then it's, a sense of belonging, a sense of connection. And it kind of all filters up to this idea of kind of a self-actualization and a self-exploration. And so when we talk in motherhood about the idea that our identities are changing and this sense of loss and this sense of grief, that's a really awesome kind of high level thinking. And that's one of the things I love about motherhood. And I get excited about the work that we do, because I think motherhood has a way of pushing us to depths within ourselves that we didn't know existed. And that creates really cool opportunities. They can feel uncomfortable, but also really cool opportunities. And so I think sometimes what happens is that, and I know I did it for myself, I so badly wanted to integrate and return to my own sense of self. I think what needed to happen first is those foundational points, so that then I could access those other higher levels of just kind of thinking and being, to figure out, okay, great. So now how do I tap back into my sense of self? And so I think what inadvertently happened is it also felt like another thing I was failing at. Okay, I need to feel like myself again. I need to start reading. I need to talk to people. And what I really needed to do is sleep and drink water and breathe and maybe take a shower. And when the moment felt like I wasn't depleted, great. Then how can I take some small steps to kind of reintegrate those parts? Because I think those parts naturally evolve. It's just sometimes if the timing isn't right or those foundational pieces aren't there, it's a lot harder to feel that. So you feel the resistance even more profoundly. You feel that loss of sense even more profoundly.
I think that's such a good point. I actually just wrapped up last week with a mom who has an 11-month-old, and we finally got him sleeping through the night. And when we had our wrap up call, she said, I just want to tell you, I kind of knew I was struggling, but I didn't know I was struggling. But I had kind of had this loss of self. And she said, after getting 5 nights of sleep, I woke up and thought, I want to go to yoga. And she said, so for the first time since having him, I went to hot yoga, and she said, that's something I used to do. And I was so happy. I think she had gone 3 days in a row. And she said, I just started to find myself again. But she said, I couldn't have done it until I was sleeping. She said, it would have been too much to even force myself to do it.
Mhm.
And so it was because that big foundational piece was missing for her, that she couldn't take the next step. But then it did come naturally. She said she literally woke up and thought, yoga's where I want to go today. And then she went, and it was great. And she's gone a few times since. But she said that would have felt too big. So I think that aligns with what you're saying. If some of the foundational pieces aren't there, it feels like a failure if you're trying to force yourself to do stuff that you're not ready to do.
Yeah, and I love that example of your client and her yoga experience, because it is making me think of one of our very favorite terms, which I would love to highlight here. This is a term that we talk about with all the moms that we work with, and it is an idea called anchor points. So, as Holly was talking about, once you have the foundational pieces in place, you can begin with really small steps. Often if things aren't where we want them to be, our instinct is to want to do more and more and more, when oftentimes what's really going to help is to do less. And so these small steps are really, really effective. So when we talk about anchor points with our clients, we define anchor points as anything in your life that is reliable, predictable, and consistent, that you can count on to make you feel like yourself no matter what storms are swirling around you. We tend to categorize anchor points into 3 different categories. We've got rituals and routines, that's one, relationships, and things that make you feel like you. And so when we work with moms, when we're talking about these small steps, what we love to do is help moms identify what their anchor points already are and which ones they might be able to re-engage with in a small, sort of incremental type of way. Because when we are stressed out or when times get tough, our anchor points are often the very first things to go. So, a few examples. Well, first of all, your client and her yoga. That's a great example. I am sure that yoga is a place that she goes to really feel like herself. And she got to the point where she felt ready to reconnect with her sense of self in that way. And that is amazing. Running is another great example. If you were a marathon runner before motherhood, maybe you're not going to hit your 6 week, or you're not going to get your green light from your doctor to go exercise, and you're maybe not going to walk out the door and run 26 miles. But what you can do is start by jogging around the block, walking around the block, starting small with these little incremental moments where you get to connect with a part of yourself that can make everything feel easier, that can help you to feel grounded and anchored no matter what else is going on. Gardening is another great example. Maybe early motherhood is not the time to plant a gigantic vegetable garden, but maybe you can plant a couple of pots of herbs that go on your patio. These small steps that help us feel like ourselves in the little pockets of time and space that we can find during this time.
And then don't beat yourself up when the potted plant dies. Let it go.
Plenty of those.
Oh, that would be me when I used to love to garden. That was one of the things I had to let go, but it's coming back. It's coming back.
Yeah.
Holly, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, because I talked to a lot of moms about this idea that what used to be our anchor points pre-kids might not have the same impact or appeal post-kids. And so I've talked to a lot of moms before who are like, I'm doing all the things I enjoy. And what we realized is you're at a different place in life, and those things might not bring the same enjoyment right now. It doesn't mean they're not going to in the future, but for right now, they aren't bringing the same type of enjoyment and energy that we were before. So that's okay to kind of put those on pause and try out a few other things to see what's working or not working. I love the idea of let's try it out. Let's kind of experiment, because sometimes it just doesn't feel the same once you have kids, but it doesn't mean it's not going to come back. It's just, don't take it as a failure if you're like, yoga used to be my, like, so for instance, I used to like yoga. I tried to do yoga in postpartum and I couldn't do it because my brain couldn't slow itself down. And it was actually excruciating to have to be still for 45 minutes. And I was like, oh, great. I just wasted 45 minutes and I feel terrible.
Totally.
So it was kind of a reorienting.
I also think you can find moments of joy in places you didn't find them before. So as you were talking, I was thinking, I never valued a cup of coffee in silence until I became a mom. And now anytime I can have it, I'm like, this is joy. Like, this is what brings me joy. And I had it this morning. I happened to get up at 5, had my cup of coffee. Not even the dogs bothered me. And I was like, yes, I have a whole 90 minutes to myself. And before I could have cared less about that. But as a mother, that's a pocket for myself that brings me joy and allows me to have time to feel like myself. So sometimes I agree. I completely agree with you, Holly. We don't always go back to what gave us joy before, but we might also find there are things that we would have never thought about before that become joyful. So, one of the things that has come up in many of the previous conversations I've had around the topic of maternal mental health is the fact that husbands and partners are not prepared well enough to support their wife and to spot the signs that they may need help. I mean, I know, Holly, it sounds like maybe Todd did know, like, okay, this doesn't seem quite right. But I know Mike was clueless, obviously, as he was heading off to go skiing, that I was struggling at all. And that has kind of been a common theme that partners, maybe they thought something was odd, but they weren't sure what to do. And they don't want to say the wrong thing. And, so often the hospitals just tell the partner when you're leaving to, worry about the mother if she doesn't want to take care of the baby or if she's acting suicidal, which are like really significant extremes. I know I struggled and I certainly took care of my baby and I don't think I was suicidal. And so I feel like that's not enough. And I'd love to know your thoughts on this topic. I don't have an answer, but I want an answer. It's really kind of been eating away at me. And so do you have advice for expecting fathers or partners or just thoughts on how we could better prepare them to be a support system? And I also want to acknowledge that I know they do go through their own transition. It's just a different one, but I'm curious your thoughts on educating fathers and partners.
Yes, that is such a great question and such a growth area. Two pieces of advice come to mind right away, and also one point. I'll start with the one point really quickly, which is that if a mom does have postpartum depression or anxiety or any other PMAD, partners are 50% more likely to also experience them. And so partners, I think in general, are not talked about as much as none of this is talked about as much as we wish. But for this partner piece, I just want to make sure to highlight that point too, because I feel like that really is a valuable piece of information. And in terms of the two pieces of advice I would give to partners, the first one, and I promise we did not plan this, is help the new mom get sleep. So we know that good solid sleep is such a protective factor for moms during this period. That was the number one thing that got me through my postpartum anxiety, was when I worked with a sleep consultant. This was unfortunately for me before I knew Allison. But once I was able to start getting 4 to 5 consecutive hours of sleep, I started feeling better. And oftentimes partners, especially if the new mom is breastfeeding, it can be really difficult for partners to know what their role is. They want to do something, they want to have a role, but it's hard to figure out what role that can be. So my first piece of advice would be, do what you can to support the new mom in getting 4 to 5 consecutive hours of sleep. That's a big ask, especially in those early days. Baby is on a 24-hour cycle. And so this is another one of those things that if it doesn't happen right away, that's okay. And it's not because you're doing anything wrong. But having that as a priority, as an intention that you set to do whatever you can, whether it's taking nighttime feedings, if that's something that's available to you, or tagging mom out for 4 to 5 hours during the day, especially in those times when baby's on a 24-hour cycle. Wherever that sleep can be obtained will be such a huge cushion for all of this. And the other piece of advice that I would give is to think about a postpartum care plan. So we put so much emphasis on a birth plan. So much of our entire pregnancy journeys is constructed around that birth day, getting to that day, getting through that day. But that's just a day or a couple or a few days if you really went through it. But then you go home and then you're like, well, now what? Where's the plan for this? And so a postpartum care plan that moms and their partners work on together before baby arrives can be so incredibly helpful, specifically around questions of, okay, say I'm a partner. What would be most helpful for you to hear if you're feeling overwhelmed or your head is spinning? What do you need to hear from me? What do you need me to do? And this is something that the two of you can discuss together, because as we said earlier, we don't always know what we're going to need, especially before we enter motherhood, when we don't know what we don't know. But talk about it together. What tends to work for you? What do you need to hear? What can I do to support you? And who else is on our team here? Because that new mom, when she comes home, really ought to be surrounded by a wonderful circle of support that goes beyond the partner as well. And so, who else is on our team that we can bring in? Having those conversations together can be so helpful in giving partners really concrete ways to support the new mom, and also can help new mom and partner feel like they're on the same team going into this experience, which can be incredibly helpful as well.
And what are your thoughts on having that conversation before, but also agreeing that you might revisit it after the baby arrives and have virtually the exact same conversation now that you're in it? And if you've maybe talked about that before, maybe the stressed out mother might be more receptive to having that conversation, because then the partner can say, remember, this was our plan to revisit this. Do you guys ever recommend that?
100%, because this goes right along with our theme of things shift after baby comes along. And so having these conversations regularly is incredible. The keys here, as we often will tell couples, are to make sure that you're having those conversations at a neutral time, when preferably you're not totally strung out and exhausted, and you're at a place where you are feeling like you're on the same team, so that those conversations can really be about, what are we doing here? How are we supporting each other? As opposed to slipping into some of those trip hazards and some of that tension that can arise when we try to have conversations like this in moments where we're not quite in the best headspace for it.
That's just general good marriage advice that's often hard to remember. So before we wrap up, I think of all these resources that, I guess this was fall in the category of things I beat myself up about, that I think, how did I not know these resources were out there? And there's so many of these. And so it seems I've worked with you guys for a long time now. So I think, oh yeah, they offer coaching, but I do want to help people who don't fully understand what you all do. You all offer coaching. It is not therapy. Can you just explain the difference between maternal coaching versus going to therapy, and kind of who is your ideal fit and where do you fit into this support system? Because I really think there's great value in helping parents understand the different types of resources that are out there so that they can find their way to the right one.
I love this question. Thank you for asking us. Yeah. I mean, it kind of it was our vision, is that we did feel like there was a gap where you go in and it's either like, well, here's a list of therapists, good luck. But then first of all, what's in the middle? But second of all, like, when you are overwhelmed to begin with, the idea of trying to navigate a therapist is really hard, of trying to find it. So we love therapy. We love therapists. we are therapists, we go to therapy, there's definitely, that's a resource. And then there are a wide range of resources. So sometimes we think about this analogy of coaching is like snorkeling. So we kind of stay on the surface. We can get a bird's eye view, kind of a macro view of, okay, what's going on? What's working? Where might some shifts be beneficial? And we really kind of focus on the present moment of what's going on now and where do you want to go? And oftentimes, when the first discussion I have with a mom, she will say, I don't know where I want to go, and I don't know what I need, and I don't know what I want. And I'm like, awesome. That's where we start. Because that's really the starting place. I mean, that's a great starting place of questioning those things and figuring out, okay, what does this look like for you then? Where we think of therapy a little bit more as scuba diving. So you kind of dive deeper into, it might be past experiences, it might be parts of yourself that feel like they would benefit from healing. It's a little bit more of that in-depth work. And coaching is a little bit more of, when we're snorkeling, we might see a shiny object that would be great to kind of take a quick dive down and say, hey, what are some insights that might be helpful for us? And we'll pick that up and take that with us on our journey. But it's a little bit more kind of active of, what do we want to do with this now? And what does this look like on a daily basis, on a weekly basis? So one of the big things I talk with moms about is this idea of integration. It's great if in our session we talk about, hey, these are some good ideas, these are some great insights, but now what? What does this actually look like to be integrated in your life on a regular basis? And so oftentimes we actually have this, we have a session called bridge sessions, and that's really what they are, of building the bridge between what do I need and how do I get there? And so that could be a range of things. So for some moms, it could be a plan of working out, okay, let's try out a few of these resources. Let's try out a yoga class. Let's try out a play group. Let's try out acupuncture. Let's try out therapy. Let's see what's working for you at this moment. And let's really come up with a plan for what is most beneficial for you right now. And then what's on the horizon.
That's awesome. And, I think another gap that you fill, I know sometimes you're a bridge to kind of help people figure out where they want to go next. But I also think, I mean, you and I have talked about this several times. The three of us have talked about it, that you don't have to be formally diagnosed with anything to be struggling, to need support, or even just to want support. Maybe you don't need it, but you want support. And you just know you're going through a transition and you could use a little bit larger village. And so I think you guys fit really nicely in that spot for someone who needs a little guidance or a little extra support. And so if a new mom just feels overwhelmed or a bit like she's struggling, what is your advice? Because I know a lot of times it's getting overlooked at the doctor's office or brushed aside. And so, where do you suggest people start?
Yes, that is such a great question. And I just want to restate what you said, Allison, because I think that is the most important piece here, which is that you do not need a diagnosis to seek help. You don't even need to be able to explain what is happening. You just need to know that you want to feel differently or that you're not feeling like yourself, period. Um, I think often we sort of, especially the type A perfectionists among us, will tell ourselves, I should be able to handle this. I'm fine. Everything's going to be fine. I should be able to handle this. And you will handle it, of course. And everyone deserves support. Everyone deserves to be able to access resources. And that was a big theme for us as we were starting Mother Tree Wellness, was this idea of how do we communicate to people that seeking additional resources and backup, it comes from a place of strength. It comes from a place of wanting to build your village, knowing that connection and information can be really helpful, as opposed to it feeling sort of problem based. Something's wrong with me if I need to reach out for help. So that was really, really important to us, and something that definitely want to highlight, that identifying that you want to feel better and doing something about it comes from a place of incredible strength. And there are so many different paths that we can take to get to begin to feel better. And that path is going to look different for every single person. So we think of three general areas that the research shows us are very, very effective in helping new moms. One being one-on-one mental health support, two being medication, three being social support. So if we want to think about where to begin, we can think about those three categories. For each mom, the path that's going to work for her is going to look different and may involve a combination of one, two, or three of those elements. It's all about knowing that if you don't feel like yourself, you deserve to feel better, knowing that these three categories exist: one-on-one mental health support, medication, and social support, which is to say, having a group of people who get it. So that can be the type of groups that we offer through Mother Tree Wellness. It can be a mom play group. It can be whatever opportunity you to have a sense of belonging with other moms who really get it without you having to explain it to them. That piece is really huge. So the first step is to know that you deserve it, and that not only is it okay to ask for help, but that when you do, you'll find that your people are so happy to help you. If you ask a friend or your partner or your a trusted someone that you really trust on your care team, like a doctor or someone like that, to help you connect with resources, they're going to leap at the opportunity to do that, because that's what humans do. Connection goes both ways. So when we feel like we need to ask for help, often we feel like we're asking somebody a favor and we're hesitant to do it. But the reality is, if you think about the last time you helped someone, that felt great and you felt more connected too. And so keeping all of that in mind can be really helpful, because that first step can feel like the most difficult one to take.
Absolutely. Well, Holly and Ellen, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so grateful that your paths crossed. It feels like destiny, and it resulted in your amazing business. And thank you for all that you do to support moms. And can you tell everyone where they can find you?
Yes, we would love to hear from all of you. We would love to hear any thoughts or questions or feedback that you have from our conversation today. We would love to make this interactive. So please come and find us on Instagram at Mother Tree Moms. You can also check out our website for more details on us and what we offer at mothertreewellnessgroup.com.
Awesome. And just as a reminder to everyone, if you would like to learn more about postpartum depression and anxiety, or are looking for additional resources, please visit postpartum.net. I'll link to the site in the show notes, as well as linking to Holly and Ellen. And as a reminder, if you are struggling, please know that you are not alone. You are not to blame. With help, you will be better. Postpartum depression and anxiety are treatable. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.